In a freezing prison cell, no wider than a coffin, a young American officer sat in silence, his eyes sunken, hands tied, lips pale and bluish from cold and hunger. In front of him, a Nazi officer circled like a hunting beast, holding a Lucky Strike cigarette temptation from home, and gently placed it on the table. Just answer a few simple questions, and you'll be warm, well-fed, and live like a gentleman. Yet, Lieutenant Walter E. Starck replied coldly, Walter Starck, Lieutenant, 0 to 7, 37897, not a word more. And so it went, day after day, night after night, for 19 days. Walter was dragged from his damp cell and interrogated twice daily. Sometimes they lured him with hot coffee, other times they threatened he'd never go home again. In that small, windowless room, there were no whips or beatings, only psychological warfare, complete isolation, and a nerve-wracking battle of wills between a silent prisoner and the Nazi interrogation machine. From a fierce aerial battle over Germany to the infamous Dulag Luft interrogation center and the miserable months at Stalag Luft, loyalty and sheer mental strength help Walter survive the nightmare of 19 days of interrogation. Let us follow the harrowing journey of an American pilot who triumphed not with bullets, but with absolute silence. In the autumn of 1944, the Allied bombing campaign deep into Germany reached its most intense phase. Lieutenant Walter E. Starck, 24 years old, a pilot with the 352nd Fighter Group, the blue-nosed bastards of Bodny, was escorting bombers into the Ruhr region. In the fierce dogfight that day, he shot down 3 enemy aircraft in quick succession, but when the third exploded, a piece of debris struck his plane. His P-51 Mustang was severely damaged. Walter tried to nurse it back home, but failed. Within just 20 minutes, smoke and flames had filled the cockpit. He was forced to bail out at dangerously low altitude and miraculously survived, landing in a wooded area near a German village. Moments after hitting the ground, he was surrounded by local militia. Unarmed, with no route of escape, Walter raised his hands in surrender. After being thoroughly searched and held temporarily, he was escorted to a military airfield the next morning. There, he faced a German officer for the first time. The man accused him of bombing and killing civilians, but Walter gave only 3 lines in reply. Walter Starck, Lieutenant, 0 to 7, 37897. That night, he and a group of POWs were loaded onto a train heading east through the night. In the rail car, a sharply dressed American tried to strike up a conversation, but another prisoner warned he could very well be a disguised German spy. Walter stayed silent. He understood, from now on, any word spoken could be exploited. And the next battle, a psychological one, was about to begin. The next morning, German soldiers brought Walter to a small military airfield a few miles away. Upon arrival, he was immediately thrown into an interrogation room. A German officer stormed in, furious at the sight of an American pilot uniform. "You people fly your bombers over Germany, killing women and children, don't you?" he shouted in German, pointing a finger at Walter's face. Though he didn't catch every word, Walter understood the accusation. He wanted to say he was a fighter pilot, not a bomber, but he knew it was useless. Walter stayed calm, looked the officer in the eyes, and answered slowly, in English, 1 word at a time, Walter E. Starck, Lieutenant, 0 to 7, 37897. The officer's eyes bulged at the prisoner's defiant stance. He clenched his teeth, barked out something in German, then ordered Walter to be dragged away. Late on the night of November 27, after the brief interrogation at the airfield, Walter was escorted to the Osnabrück train station. There, German guards crammed him together with 4 other American POWs into a crowded rail car. The iron train clattered through the night, taking the soldiers far from home to an unknown destination. In the swaying carriage, Walter tried to start a quiet conversation to calm his nerves. Sitting next to him was a man who introduced himself as Lieutenant John from Minnesota. He too had been shot down and captured. They exchanged a few hushed words about their units, missions, and hopes of making it through, but tension lingered. Another POW leaned close to Walter and warned, "Be careful with John." He looked too tidy, clean-shaven, perfectly pressed clothes without a speck of dirt, completely different from the others, who were unshaven and filthy after days hiding in the woods. John could be a German agent in disguise, the prisoner suspected. Walter felt a chill. The enemy was indeed devious, planting spies among POWs to extract intelligence. He chose to stay alert and silent, revealing nothing more. That fateful train rolled through the dark countryside of Germany. Walter's mind spun with questions. Where are they taking me? What future lies ahead? The next morning, the train carrying Walter and the other POWs stopped at Oberursel on the outskirts of Frankfurt. From there, he was taken to a place feared by all captured Allied pilots, Dulag Luft. Its full name was Durchgangslager der Luftwaffe, but among POWs, it was synonymous with the most dreaded interrogation center of Nazi Germany. Dulag Luft was located in Oberursel, about 13 kilometers northwest of Frankfurt. By late 1944, it had become the largest interrogation facility for Allied airmen in Europe. Nearly every captured pilot in the European theater passed through this place before being sent to a permanent POW camp. Records show that in 1944 alone, around 29,000 Allied airmen went through the ordeal of Dulag Luft. Now, Walter E. Starck was one of them. The Dulag Luft interrogation camp in Oberursel, Nazi Germany, where most captured Allied pilots were sent for questioning before being transferred to permanent POW camps. Here, prisoners were typically held in small cells and placed under complete isolation. According to the Geneva Convention, the Germans were not allowed to hold POWs in solitary confinement for more than 28 days, but even that period was long enough to break a man's will. Most pilots only stayed at Dulag Luft for 1 to 2 weeks before being relocated, yet that brief window felt like a true nightmare. Upon arrival, Walter was separated from the other prisoners and thrown into a cramped solitary cell, no more than 1.2 meters by 3 meters, just enough room for a man to lie down with his legs stretched. The 4 enclosed walls were cold and suffocating. Each cell was a fully isolated prison with no windows, only a narrow ventilation slit and a thick iron door that was always locked from the outside. This was Dulag Luft's signature method, solitary confinement to break the spirit, cutting off all contact before interrogation. Walter soon realized that time moved painfully slow in the dark. With no clear sense of day or night, he passed the hours counting bricks on the wall, listening to distant footsteps in the corridor, and trying to guess if it was his turn next. As expected, just a few hours after being locked up, the heavy iron door swung open. Several guards burst in, blindfolded him, and escorted him to the interrogation room. There, a middle-aged German officer was already waiting. He spoke fluent English with a surprisingly polite tone. "Good day, Lieutenant Starck. Please, have a seat. Let's talk for a moment." Walter sat down cautiously, facing the enemy. The mental battle had begun. The officer started with a calm voice. "We know you're a P-51 Mustang pilot. Your unit is stationed in Bodney, England, correct? Mr. Starck, your fellow countrymen here have already told us many interesting things." He watched Walter's face intently as he spoke. Walter kept his expression as cold and unreadable as stone. Inside, he was deeply shocked to hear the enemy recite the exact name of his 352nd Fighter Group. Had someone already talked? Or did they know beforehand? His heart pounded, but on the outside he forced himself to appear calm. "Walter E. Starck, Lieutenant, 0 to 73, 7897. He repeated just those 3 details, his voice flat and cold. The German officer furrowed his brow slightly, then smiled. "My friend, we have American cigarettes, hot coffee, even ham sandwiches." He slid a pack of fragrant Lucky Strikes toward Walter. "If you'll just answer a few simple questions, you'll be treated like a gentleman. We even have a yard where you can play baseball with the other prisoners." Walter listened, but remained unmoved. To him, such sweet words and lavish promises were nothing more than traps. He calmly replied, "My name is Walter Starck, Lieutenant, serial number 0 to 737897. The officer's smile vanished. He spoke through clenched teeth. "Starck, You're a smart man. Don't make yourself suffer for no reason. Just tell me this week's bombing targets of the U.S. Air Force. That's all. Then you'll get to rest comfortably." Walter pressed his lips tight and stayed silent. In his mind, he saw the American flag and remembered the oath never to betray his country. Seeing the prisoner's defiance, the officer slammed his fist on the table. "We have many ways to make you talk," he roared, his face flushed with rage. Then he shouted for the guards to escort Walter back to his cell. The days that followed were a string of endless interrogations with every psychological tactic imaginable. The Dulag Luft interrogators had studied each prisoner carefully, their hobbies, habits, weaknesses, and strengths to craft personalized strategies. For those who seemed fearful, they threatened brutal torture, sometimes they actually carried it out. For the more suggestible ones, they lured them with goodies, tasty food, clean clothes, warm blankets, fragrant cigarettes, if they would just reveal a few harmless details. For the strong-willed like Walter, the interrogators used the soft approach during sessions, no threats, no beatings, but once back in the cell, they endured long stretches of solitary confinement in a cold, damp cell barely 4 by 10 feet. No matter what tactics the enemy used, he firmly repeated only the most basic information about himself, then fell silent. Each time he returned to his cell, Walter was exhausted both physically and mentally. The meager meals were nothing more than a piece of dry black bread and a bowl of watery soup, hardly enough to ward off hunger or the biting cold. At night, he curled up on the freezing concrete floor, at times unsure if he could make it to the next morning. In moments of darkness, doubt crept in. Maybe I should say something, just a little, just to get some rest. But then, the faces of his family and comrades came rushing back. He remembered the U.S. military's code of honor. A prisoner of war must provide only name, rank, and serial number, never military information. For the safety of those still fighting out there, Walter clenched his jaw and refused to yield. The psychological battle inside the cell was silent, but no less intense than combat. Behind the iron door, Walter quietly wrestled with his own fears. He gave himself mental exercises to stay strong. Each day, he tried to recall a joyful childhood memory in detail or silently hum a favorite tune to ease the loneliness. He marked the passing days by scratching tallies into the wall, using a piece of broken metal, hoping each mark brought him closer to freedom. And with every interrogation, no matter how piercing the questions, how generous the offers, or how severe the threats, he always replied calmly, "My name is Walter Eugene Starck, Lieutenant, serial number 0737897. Time passed. 5 days, then 10. Walter's hair and beard grew unkempt, his clothes filthy, his eyes sunken from sleeplessness. On the other side, the interrogators were also losing patience. They tried one last bait. One morning, the German translator walked in with a cup of hot coffee and a cigarette. He set them in front of Walter, speaking gently, "We give up. You truly are a determined man. Fine, keep your secrets. This afternoon, we'll send you to the POW camp with your comrades. You'll be able to rest, play sports." Walter was momentarily surprised, but said nothing, staying cautious. The man shrugged. "At least accept this small gift, a token of respect for a brave officer." He pressed an American cigarette into Walter's hand and left. Walter wasn't sure if the interrogation was truly over, but it was the first sign. After 19 relentless days and nights, the German interrogators finally gave up against Walter Starck's iron wall. He had triumphed in this silent psychological war. By strictly following the code name, rank, serial number, nothing more, Walter revealed no military secrets throughout the entire ordeal. For a young prisoner, it was an extraordinary feat that spoke volumes of his unshakable spirit. Though weakened, starved, and visibly thinner, Walter allowed himself a faint smile as the gates of Dulag Luft closed behind him in late December 1944. He was being transferred to a regular prisoner of war camp, where he hoped conditions would be more humane than this place of torment. After a long journey, Walter was transferred to Stalag Luft I, the Allied Airmen's POW camp in Bath, northern Germany. This would be his temporary home for the final months of the war. At that time, the camp was overcrowded, with nearly 9,000 captured airmen, most of them American and British. To his surprise, Walter reunited with a few former squadron mates, a meeting of comrades in captivity that helped steady his spirit. Life at Stalag Luft I was no less brutal than the battlefield. Each barrack held hundreds of men in cold, cramped conditions with constant hunger. Walter suffered severe chilblains on his feet due to the damp floors and lack of warm clothing. Rations were meager: black bread, watery soup, and ersatz coffee, and everyone lost noticeable weight. Red Cross food parcels rarely arrived, blocked by the escalating war. Even so, the prisoners' spirit was not extinguished. They secretly built radios, listened to BBC broadcasts, and passed on the news through an underground newspaper called Pow Wow. Reports of Allied victories were a light at the end of the tunnel, keeping hope alive. Communication with family was nearly impossible. Walter wrote regularly to his mother, but received no replies. It wasn't until early 1945, when the prisoners were allowed to record short voice messages for home, that he jokingly asked his mother to tell his commander he had shot down 3 more Bf 109 seconds before being captured. That broadcast reached dozens of American amateur radio operators, who wrote to Walter's mother to say they had heard his voice, easing some of her long-held fears. In the camp, escape was out of the question. German guards watched closely, and the barracks were elevated above the ground to let sniffer dogs crawl underneath. The only option was to wait. In early May 1945, as Germany neared surrender, the camp's commander, a reasonable German officer, quietly negotiated with the American prisoner representative to withdraw without bloodshed. On the morning of May 1st, the guards vanished and the gates stood wide open. The prisoners erupted in joy. A handmade American flag was hoisted in place of the Nazi emblem, an unforgettable moment of liberation. The Red Army quickly arrived to take over. Contrary to fears, the Soviet troops were friendly and even brought potatoes and live cows from nearby farms to feed the prisoners. The camp jokingly established a roast potato rule. If you ate one, you had to put another raw one in the fire to keep everyone warm and fed. On May 13th, Mother's Day, Walter boarded a B-17 bomber headed for freedom. And the most miraculous moment came. At a reception camp in France, he unexpectedly found his younger brother, Karl Starck, also a captured pilot, recently rescued from the Eastern Front. The two brothers embraced in tears, stunned to have both survived and now reunited after months apart in wartime. In June 1945, they returned to Milwaukee. Their elderly mother stood silently on the porch, tears falling, but this time tears of joy. Walter E. Starck embodied loyalty and iron will during the darkest days of war. He was not only a brave pilot who took down enemy planes over Europe, but also a silent warrior who stood strong in the hell of captivity. For 19 consecutive days of interrogation at Dulag Luft, under sophisticated psychological pressure and complete isolation, Walter held fast to only 3 pieces of information: his name, rank, and service number. He understood that this silence was not weakness, but another kind of battle, quiet, yet no less fierce, to protect his comrades and his country. The months that followed at Stalag Luft I were a struggle for survival amid hunger, cold, and fragile hope. Yet, in those harsh conditions, camaraderie kept the spirit alive. Bits of victory news whispered hand to hand, roasted potatoes shared under unspoken rules, letters sent home, not knowing if they'd arrive. These were how the soldiers clung to faith. Then, one morning, as the American flag rose over the Bath camp, all suffering erupted into 2 words: freedom. Walter returned home and embraced his mother after all the months apart. But he didn't stop there. He continued to serve in the United States Air Force, contributing to the Berlin airlift and many post-war missions, before retiring with the rank of colonel in 1965. A life of service, quiet, yet brilliant. Not all heroes carry guns. Some win by staying silent, and that very silence, held with honor and loyalty, can echo louder than any proclamation. The name Walter E. Starck, once whispered in a freezing prison cell, has become a symbol of the unbreakable spirit of the American soldier, those who walk through darkness and return bearing light.